Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest burden. Sometimes the one who gets pushed around the most has survived battles that would break others. And sometimes a simple glimpse beneath the surface reveals a truth so powerful that it can silence an entire room of bullies in an instant. This is the story of Maya Chun, a woman who learned that real strength isn't about being the loudest or the meanest. It's about carrying your scars with dignity, honoring your past, and standing tall even when the whole world seems determined to knock you down. What happened in that military boot camp would change everything, not just for Maya, but for everyone who thought they knew what weakness looked like. Maya Chun had always been the type of person who blended into the background. At 23, she possessed an almost ghost-like quality that made her easy to overlook in crowds. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she favored loose-fitting clothes that seemed to swallow her petite frame. When she spoke, which wasn't often, her voice carried a soft, measured cadence that made people lean in to hear her properly. The decision to join the military had surprised everyone who knew her. Her college roommates couldn't believe it when Maya announced she was enlisting. Her professors, who had grown accustomed to her sitting quietly in the back row, taking meticulous notes, but rarely participating in discussions, were shocked when she didn't return for her senior year. Even her own mother had stared at her in disbelief when Maya called to tell her the news. The military, her mother had repeated over the phone, her voice pitched high with confusion. "Maya, sweetheart, are you sure? You've never been one for a confrontation." Maya had smiled at that, though her mother couldn't see it through the phone. If only she knew, Maya had thought. If only any of them knew what she had already survived. The truth was, Maya had her reasons for wanting structure, discipline, and purpose in her life. She needed something bigger than herself to focus on, something that would push her beyond the comfortable boundaries she had built around herself over the years. The military represented a chance to prove to herself that she was stronger than she appeared, stronger than anyone gave her credit for. The bus ride to Fort Benning had been long and uncomfortable. Maya sat near the back, watching the landscape blur past the window as they traveled through Georgia. Around her, other recruits chatted nervously or tried to sleep. Some bragged about how tough they were, how ready they were for whatever the drill instructors would throw at them. Others sat in silent contemplation, perhaps wondering, like Maya, if they had made the right choice. When they finally arrived at the base, the reality of what she had signed up for hit Maya like a physical blow. The drill instructors were already shouting before the bus had completely stopped. The moment the doors opened, a wall of sound crashed over them. Orders barked with such intensity that Maya's ears rang. "Off the bus. Move, move, move. You have 30 seconds to get your sorry selves in formation." Maya grabbed her small duffel bag and filed off the bus with the others. The Georgia heat was oppressive, even in the early morning, and sweat began to bead on her forehead immediately. She found herself stumbling slightly as she tried to keep up with the pace of the other recruits, many of whom were taller and had longer strides than she did. The drill instructor, a tall, imposing man with steel-gray hair and muscles that strained against his uniform, began his initial assessment of the new arrivals. His name tag read SSG Morrison, and his eyes moved over each recruit with the cold efficiency of someone evaluating livestock. Well, he said, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "What do we have here? Looks like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel these days." His gaze stopped on Maya, who stood near the end of the line. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing perhaps 110 pounds soaking wet, she looked impossibly small among the other recruits. Morrison walked over to her, his boots clicking sharply against the pavement. "What's your name, recruit?" "Chun, drill sergeant," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Morrison circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Chun, and what exactly made you think you could handle military training, Chun? You look like a strong wind could blow you over." A few snickers rippled through the formation. Maya kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her face expressionless. She had heard worse. Much worse. "Did you get lost on your way to summer camp?" Morrison continued. his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because this isn't Girl Scouts, sweetheart. This is the United States Army. More laughter from the other recruits. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only made things worse. Morrison moved on to terrorize other recruits, but Maya could feel the damage had already been done. In those first few minutes, she had been marked as the weak link, the easy target. She could see it in the sideways glances from her fellow recruits, could hear it in the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. The first few weeks of basic training were exactly as brutal as Maya had expected, but not necessarily in the ways she had prepared for. The physical challenges were difficult, certainly. The long runs in the oppressive Georgia heat left her gasping for air, while others seemed to handle them with relative ease. The obstacle courses tested every muscle in her body, pushing her to limits she didn't know she had. But it was the social dynamics that proved to be the most challenging aspect of Maya's training. A group of recruits, led by a loud, aggressive young man named Derek Sullivan, seemed to take particular pleasure in making her life miserable. Sullivan was everything Maya wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, confident to the point of arrogance, and blessed with the kind of natural athleticism that made the physical challenges of training seem effortless. Sullivan had appointed himself the unofficial leader of their platoon, and he seemed to view Maya's presence as a personal affront. During meals, he would make loud comments about how the military was lowering its standards to let anyone in. During training exercises, he would position himself near her just to offer running commentary on her performance. "Come on, Chun," he would call out when she struggled with the rope climb. "My little sister could do better than that, and she's 12. The others in Sullivan's circle, a rotating cast of recruits who seemed drawn to his confidence like moths to a flame, would laugh on cue. There was Jessica Martinez, a former high school athlete who seemed to enjoy having someone to look down on. There was Mike Kowalski, a guy from Chicago who acted tough but always seemed to be following someone else's lead. And there was Ashley Brooks, who had initially seemed friendly to Maya, but had quickly aligned herself with the popular crowd once she realized which way the wind was blowing. Maya endured their comments and pranks with quiet dignity. She never complained to the drill instructors, never fought back, never even raised her voice. When they hit her gear, she found it or did without. When they made jokes at her expense, she absorbed them silently. When they excluded her from group activities during rare free time, she found ways to occupy herself alone. Her response, or lack thereof, only seemed to embolden them further. To Sullivan and his followers, Maya's silence was proof of weakness. They interpreted her refusal to engage with their harassment as an inability to defend herself rather than a conscious choice to avoid escalation. The truth was more complicated than they could have imagined. Maya's quiet demeanor wasn't born from weakness or fear. It came from experience, hard-won knowledge about when to fight and when to endure. She had learned, through circumstances far more challenging than anything these privileged kids could imagine, that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was simply refuse to be broken. Every morning, Maya woke before reveille and spent a few minutes in silent meditation. It was a practice she had developed years earlier, a way of centering herself and preparing for whatever the day might bring. During these quiet moments, she would often touch the spot on her shoulder where, hidden beneath her t-shirt, a tattoo told a story that none of her tormentors could even begin to comprehend. The tattoo was simple in design but profound in meaning. It showed a small bird, its wings spread wide as it soared above a dark landscape. Below the bird, in elegant script, were Chinese characters that translated to "in memory of those who gave their tomorrow for our today." But it wasn't the words that made the tattoo special. It was what it represented, and why Maya had chosen to permanently mark her body with this particular image. As Maya went through her daily routine of training, harassment, and quiet endurance, she carried this secret close to her heart. The other recruits saw only what was on the surface, a small, quiet girl who seemed out of place in their aggressive, masculine world. They had no idea that beneath her reserved exterior lay a strength forged in circumstances that would have destroyed most people their age. The harassment continued to escalate as the weeks passed. Sullivan and his crew became more creative in their attempts to break Maya's spirit. They would time their verbal attacks for moments when the drill instructors were out of earshot. They would accidentally bump into her during formations, causing her to stumble. They would spread rumors about her, suggesting that she was only there because of some kind of diversity quota. Through it all, Maya remained focused on her goals. She studied harder than anyone else, memorizing military procedures and protocols with the dedication of someone who knew that knowledge could be the difference between life and death. She pushed herself physically, staying after organized training sessions to work on her weaknesses. She volunteered for extra duties, earning the grudging respect of some of the drill instructors, even as her fellow recruits continued to view her as an easy target. The breaking point came during the 6th week of training. The platoon was engaged in a particularly challenging field exercise that required them to work together to navigate through a series of obstacles while carrying heavy equipment. The exercise was designed to test not only their individual skills, but their ability to function as a unit. Maya had been assigned to carry one of the heavier pieces of equipment, despite her small size. She struggled with the weight, but refused to ask for help or complain. Sullivan, who had been assigned as the team leader for this particular exercise, seemed to take sadistic pleasure in making the challenges even more difficult for her. "Chun, you're slowing us down," he barked as Maya struggled to keep up with the pace he had set. "If you can't handle the load, maybe you should have stayed home." Maya gritted her teeth and adjusted her grip on the equipment. Her shoulders burned with the strain, and sweat stung her eyes, but she pressed on. The other members of the team exchanged glances, but said nothing. They had learned that speaking up for Maya only resulted in becoming targets themselves. As they approached the final obstacle, a muddy creek that they had to cross while maintaining their equipment above water level, Sullivan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of working with the team to find the safest crossing point, he deliberately led them to a section of the creek where the bottom was uneven and treacherous. "This way," he called out, his voice filled with false confidence. "We'll cross here." Maya could see immediately that the crossing was dangerous. The water was deeper than it appeared, and the muddy bottom was littered with rocks and debris that would make it easy to lose footing. But she wasn't the team leader, and speaking up would only result in more ridicule. One by one, the team members entered the water. Sullivan went first, his long legs and superior strength allowing him to navigate the crossing with relative ease. The others followed, some struggling more than others, but managing to make it across safely. Maya was the last to enter the water. The moment her feet touched the muddy bottom, she knew she was in trouble. The equipment she was carrying threw off her balance, and the uneven footing made it impossible to find stability. She took 2 careful steps, then 3, fighting against the current and the weight of her load. That's when Sullivan made his move. Instead of helping her or offering encouragement, he deliberately splashed water in her direction, causing her to lose what little balance she had managed to maintain. Maya went down hard, the equipment flying from her hands as she crashed into the muddy water. The current, stronger than it had appeared from the bank, immediately began to drag her downstream. Her boots slipped on the rocky bottom, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't find her footing. The other recruits stood on the bank, some laughing at what they assumed was just another example of Maya's incompetence. Sullivan wore a satisfied smirk, clearly pleased with the success of his sabotage. None of them seemed to realize that Maya was actually in real danger. But Maya didn't panic. Even as the water rose to her chest and threatened to pull her further downstream, she remained calm and focused, drawing on reserves of strength and determination that her tormentors couldn't even imagine. She fought her way back to the surface and slowly, methodically, worked her way toward the bank. When she finally emerged from the water, soaked and covered in mud but unbroken, something had changed in her eyes. The quiet acceptance was still there, but it was now accompanied by something else, a steely resolve that hadn't been there before. Sullivan was still smirking when Maya walked up to him. "Nice job, Chun," he said mockingly. "Real professional." Maya looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made everyone lean in to listen. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Sullivan and his followers to wonder what exactly she meant by that. They would find out soon enough. The incident at the creek marked a turning point, though not in the way anyone expected. Rather than breaking Maya's spirit, Sullivan's sabotage seemed to have awakened something in her that had been dormant. In the days that followed, her performance and training improved dramatically. She moved with a newfound confidence that caught the attention of the drill instructors, even as it puzzled her fellow recruits. Staff Sergeant Morrison noticed the change immediately. During weapons training, Maya's accuracy improved to near-perfect levels almost overnight. Her movements became more fluid, more purposeful. When they practiced combat maneuvers, she demonstrated an understanding of tactics and strategy that surprised even the most experienced instructors. "What did you learn to shoot like that, Sean?" Morrison asked after Maya had just completed a perfect score on the rifle range for the third day in a row. Maya simply looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes and said, "I've always been a good student, drill sergeant." But Morrison wasn't satisfied with that answer. He had been training recruits for over 15 years, and he knew natural talent when he saw it. This wasn't just natural talent. This was experience. The way Maya held her weapon, the way she moved through combat scenarios, the way she seemed to anticipate threats before they materialized. These were skills that came from training, not instinct. That evening, Morrison pulled Maya's file to review her background more carefully. What he found was surprisingly sparse. Maya Chun, age 23, born in San Francisco to parents who had immigrated from Taiwan. Excellent academic record throughout high school and college. No military experience in her family that he could find. No obvious explanation for the skills she was displaying. But there were gaps in the timeline that troubled him. A 6-month period during her junior year of college where she had taken a leave of absence, officially listed as for personal reasons. Medical records that showed treatment for what was vaguely described as trauma recovery. A psychological evaluation that had been required before her enlistment that mentioned resolved PTSD, but gave no details about the source of the trauma. Morrison made a mental note to keep a closer eye on Maya Chun. In his experience, recruits with hidden depths were either going to be among his best soldiers or his biggest problems. Time would tell which category Maya fell into. Meanwhile, Sullivan and his crew were becoming increasingly frustrated with their inability to break Maya's spirit. The creek incident should have been the final straw, the moment where she finally broke down or quit. Instead, she seemed stronger than ever. Worse, some of the other recruits were starting to notice her improved performance and question whether the harassment was justified. "I don't get it," Jessica Martinez said during one of their informal gatherings in the barracks. "She's actually getting pretty good at this stuff. Maybe we should back off a little." Sullivan's jaw tightened. He had built his reputation in the platoon on being the alpha, the one who set the social hierarchy. Maya's refusal to stay in her assigned place at the bottom of that hierarchy was a direct challenge to his authority. "She got lucky a few times," he said dismissively. "Don't let it fool you. She's still the same weak little girl who almost drowned in a puddle." But even as he said it, Sullivan could hear the doubt in his own voice. Maya's transformation was undeniable, and it was making him look foolish in front of the others. He needed to do something dramatic to reassert his dominance before he lost control of the situation entirely. The opportunity came during their next major field exercise. The platoon was participating in a war game scenario that would test everything they had learned so far. They would be divided into opposing teams and tasked with capturing specific objectives while avoiding enemy forces. It was the kind of complex, multi-day exercise that separated the strong from the weak. Sullivan used his influence to ensure that Maya was assigned to his team, officially, so they could keep an eye on her and make sure she didn't hold them back. In reality, he was planning to use the exercise as an opportunity to orchestrate her final humiliation. The scenario began at dawn on a Monday morning. Maya's team was tasked with infiltrating an enemy camp and retrieving intelligence without being detected. It was exactly the kind of mission that played to Maya's strengths: stealth, patience, and careful planning. But Sullivan had other ideas. "We're going to hit them hard and fast," he announced during their initial planning session. "Forget all this sneaking around nonsense. We'll overwhelm them with superior firepower." Maya spoke up for the first time during the planning session. "The mission parameters specifically call for stealth," she said quietly. "A direct assault will likely result in mission failure." Sullivan turned on her with barely controlled anger. "Nobody asked for your opinion, Chun. You're here to follow orders, not give them." "But the tactical situation clearly favors," Maya began. "I said shut up," Sullivan snapped, his voice rising to a shout that caused several other recruits to look over in surprise. "You think because you got lucky a few times at the range that you're some kind of military genius? You're nothing, Chun. You're dead weight. And the sooner you accept that, the better off everyone will be." Maya looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood," she said simply. But Sullivan wasn't finished. The public nature of the confrontation, and Maya's calm response to his outburst, made him feel like he was losing face. He needed to push harder to find the breaking point that had so far eluded him. "You know what your problem is, Chun?" he continued, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you're special. You think you've got some kind of secret strength that makes you different from the rest of us. But I see right through you. You're just a scared little girl playing dress-up in a soldier's uniform." The other members of the team shifted uncomfortably. Even those who had participated in the harassment before could sense that Sullivan was crossing a line. There was something ugly and desperate in his tone that made them want to look away. Maya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of pain that was there and gone so quickly that most people missed it entirely. But Sullivan saw it, and he smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had finally found his target's weakness. "That's it, isn't it?" he pressed on, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "You're scared. All this tough girl act is just covering up the fact that you're terrified. What are you so afraid of, Chun? What happened to you that made you such a coward?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around them, the other recruits had gone completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond normal military hazing. Even Sullivan seemed to realize that he had pushed too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Maya stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear her. "You want to know what I'm afraid of?" she asked, her dark eyes fixed on Sullivan's face. "I'm afraid of becoming like the people who hurt others because they can. I'm afraid of turning into someone who finds strength in making others weak. I'm afraid of forgetting that every person you tear down is someone's child, someone's hope, someone's reason for living." Sullivan opened his mouth to respond, but Maya wasn't finished. "You think I don't know what you're trying to do?" she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You think I don't recognize the tactics? The isolation, the constant criticism, the attempts to make me doubt my own worth? I've seen it all before, Sullivan. I've lived through worse than anything your small mind could imagine." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Maya's voice carried a weight of experience that was impossible to ignore, and suddenly, Sullivan found himself at a loss for words. "The difference between you and the people who hurt me before," Maya said, stepping closer to Sullivan until she was looking up directly into his eyes, "is that they had real power. They had real weapons. They had real reasons to want me broken. You're just a bully who peaked in high school and can't handle the fact that not everyone is impressed by your act." Sullivan's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He could feel the eyes of the other recruits on him, could sense that the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. Maya's words had exposed something raw and uncomfortable about his own motivations, and he didn't like what he saw reflected back at him. "You think you know me?" he snarled, stepping closer to Maya in what was clearly meant as an intimidating gesture. "You don't know anything about me or what I've been through." Maya didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to grow calmer as Sullivan became more agitated. "You're right," she said simply. "I don't know your story, but I know pain when I see it. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to hurt others because they're hurting inside. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" For a moment, Sullivan looked like he might actually strike her. His hands clenched into fists, and several of the other recruits tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Maya just stood there, completely relaxed, watching him with something that almost looked like compassion. That expression, that look of understanding rather than fear, seemed to deflate Sullivan's anger more effectively than any show of force could have. He took a step back, his face still flushed, but his posture less aggressive. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "No," Maya agreed quietly. "It's not, but maybe it doesn't have to end the way you think it does." The war game exercise proceeded according to Sullivan's original plan, which was to say it was a disaster. The direct assault approach failed spectacularly, resulting in the capture of most of the team within the first few hours. Maya, who had been assigned to a support role specifically to keep her out of the action, was one of the few team members who managed to avoid capture. From her hidden position, she watched as Sullivan and the others were killed or captured by the opposing force. Following military protocol, she should have retreated to the designated rally point and reported the mission failure. Instead, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Working alone, using skills that seemed to come from nowhere, Maya completed the original mission objective. She infiltrated the enemy camp, retrieved the intelligence package, and extracted safely without being detected. When the exercise concluded and the referees tallied the results, they found themselves in the unusual position of declaring a mission success despite the failure of the primary assault team. Staff Sergeant Morrison was waiting for Maya when she returned to base. His expression was unreadable as he examined the intelligence package she had retrieved. "Want to explain how you pulled this off, Chun?" he asked. Maya met his gaze steadily. "I follow my training, drill sergeant." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "That wasn't regular Army training. Those were advanced techniques, the kind of stuff we don't teach until much later in a soldier's career. Where did you learn them?" Maya was quiet for so long that Morrison thought she wasn't going to answer. But she finally spoke. Her words were carefully chosen. "Sometimes life teaches you things before you're ready to learn them, drill sergeant. Sometimes survival requires skills that no classroom can provide." It wasn't really an answer, but Morrison could see that it was all he was going to get. He made another mental note to dig deeper into Maya Chen's background. There was definitely more to her story than what appeared in her official file. That evening, as the platoon gathered for their after-action review, the dynamic had shifted noticeably. Sullivan was subdued, still smarting from both his tactical failure and his confrontation with Maya. Several of the recruits who had previously gone along with the harassment now looked at Maya with something approaching respect. Maya herself seemed unchanged by the day's events. She listened to the critique of the exercise with the same focused attention she brought to everything else, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. To an outside observer, she looked like just another dedicated recruit trying to learn from her mistakes. But those who had witnessed the confrontation with Sullivan could see something different in her now. The mask of quiet submission had slipped just enough to reveal glimpses of the strength that lay beneath. Maya Chun was not the weak, frightened girl they had assumed her to be. She was something else entirely. As the days passed, the harassment didn't stop completely, but it became more subdued. Sullivan still made the occasional snide comment, and his followers still excluded Maya from their social circle, but the vicious edge was gone. It was as if Maya's words had forced them to confront something uncomfortable about their own behavior. More importantly, Maya's performance continued to improve. She excelled in every aspect of training, from physical fitness to academic study to practical skills. The drill instructors began to take notice, and some of the other recruits started to seek her out for help with their own struggles. One evening, as Maya was cleaning her weapon in the barracks, a recruit named Tommy Park approached her hesitantly. Tommy was one of the younger members of the platoon, barely 18 and clearly homesick. He had been struggling with marksmanship and was in danger of falling behind. "Hey, Chun," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure Sullivan wasn't watching. "I heard you're really good with the rifle. Could you maybe give me some tips? I'm having trouble with my groupings." Maya looked up from her weapon, surprised by the request. "Have you asked the instructors?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, but they just tell me to practice more. I am practicing, but I'm not getting any better. I'm starting to worry they might recycle me." Maya considered this for a moment. Helping Tommy would mean exposing herself further, making it clear to everyone that she possessed skills beyond what a typical recruit should have. But she could see the genuine worry in the young man's eyes, and she remembered what it felt like to be struggling and alone. "Okay," she said finally. "Meet me at the range during free time tomorrow. But we keep this between us." Tommy's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Chun. I really appreciate it." Word of Maya's coaching spread quietly through the platoon. Soon, other recruits were approaching her for help with various aspects of training. She helped Maria Santos with her hand-to-hand combat techniques, showed David Kim some tricks for improving his running time, and taught Jennifer Walsh how to field strip her weapon more efficiently. Maya's tutoring sessions were conducted quietly, away from the drill instructors, and, more importantly, away from Sullivan and his remaining followers. Those who benefited from her help were grateful and discreet, understanding instinctively that Maya's willingness to help came with certain unspoken conditions. The change in platoon dynamics didn't go unnoticed by the drill instructors. Morrison, in particular, was intrigued by the subtle shift in morale and performance. Several recruits who had been struggling were now showing marked improvement, and the general atmosphere in the platoon seemed more positive. During a meeting with the other drill instructors, Morrison brought up his observations. "There's something happening in 3rd Platoon," he said, spreading out performance charts on the conference table. "Look at these improvement curves. Half a dozen recruits showing dramatic gains in the past 2 weeks." Drill Sergeant Williams, a veteran instructor with over 20 years of experience, studied the charts with interest. "Any idea what's causing it?" Morrison thought about Maya Chun and her mysterious background. "I have my suspicions, but I want to do some more investigation before I say anything definitive." "Well, whatever it is, keep it up," Williams said with approval. "These are some of the best improvement rates I've seen in years." As Maya's influence on the platoon grew, Sullivan found himself increasingly isolated. His core group of followers remained loyal, but they were a minority now. The majority of the platoon had either moved into Maya's sphere of influence or had simply grown tired of the constant negativity that surrounded Sullivan. The situation came to a head during the final week of basic training. The platoon was preparing for their graduation ceremony, and tensions were running high. Everyone was exhausted from months of intensive training, and the stress of impending transition to their next phase of military life was taking its toll. Sullivan, perhaps sensing that his time as the dominant personality in the platoon was coming to an end, decided to make one final attempt to reassert his authority. He chose to do it in the most public way possible, during the platoon's final field exercise. The exercise was meant to be a culmination of everything they had learned, a chance to demonstrate their skills as a cohesive unit before graduation. It was also their last chance to prove themselves to the drill instructors, who would be writing the evaluations that would follow them throughout their military careers. Sullivan had been chosen as the platoon leader for the exercise, a role that should have been an honor, but which he seemed to view primarily as an opportunity for revenge. As the platoon prepared for the mission briefing, he pulled Maya aside. "Chun," he said, his voice carrying the same ugly tone that had characterized their confrontation weeks earlier. "I want you to know that I haven't forgotten what happened between us. You think you're hot stuff now because you helped a few people with their shooting? You think that makes you some kind of leader?" Maya looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout their months of conflict. "I think we should focus on the mission, Sullivan. This is important for everyone." Sullivan's face darkened. "Don't tell me what to focus on. And don't think that just because some of these idiots look up to you now, that anything has really changed. When this exercise is over and we go our separate ways, you'll go back to being exactly what you've always been. Nothing." Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying Sullivan's face. When she spoke, her voice was sad rather than angry. "You know what the saddest part about this whole thing is?" she said. "You could have been a real leader. You have natural charisma, you're smart, you're physically capable. You could have lifted everyone up instead of tearing them down. You could have made this experience better for everyone, including yourself." Sullivan opened his mouth to respond, but Maya continued. "Instead, you chose to use your gifts to hurt people. And now, when you look around, you see that people are moving away from you. You see that the influence you had was built on fear rather than respect. And instead of asking yourself why, instead of wondering if maybe you could change course, you're doubling down on the same behavior that got you here." She paused, then added quietly, "It doesn't have to be this way. Even now, you could choose to be different." For a moment, Sullivan looked like he might actually consider her words. Something flickered across his face, uncertainty, perhaps even regret. But then his expression hardened again, and Maya could see that he had made his choice. "Save the psychology for someone who cares, Chun," he said coldly. "And get ready for the exercise. I'm going to make sure you remember why you never belonged here in the first place." As Sullivan walked away, Maya felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. She had seen this pattern before, had lived through the escalation that came when someone committed fully to destruction rather than growth. She knew that the exercise would be more than just a test of military skills. It would be a confrontation that had been building since the day she arrived. What Sullivan didn't know was that Maya was ready for whatever he had planned. More than ready. The quiet girl who had arrived at basic training months earlier had been transformed by the experience, but not in the way her tormentors had intended. Instead of being broken down, she had been refined like steel in a forge. The real test was about to begin. The final field exercise was designed to be the ultimate test of everything the recruits had learned during their time at basic training. It would take place over 3 days in a remote section of the base, where thick woods and rough terrain would challenge their navigation skills, endurance, and ability to work as a team under pressure. The scenario was complex. The platoon would be inserted into hostile territory with the mission of locating and destroying 3 enemy weapons caches while avoiding capture by opposing forces played by advanced infantry soldiers from other units. They would have limited supplies, no communication with base except for emergency situations, and would need to rely entirely on their training and each other to succeed. Staff Sergeant Morrison briefed the platoon on the morning of the exercise, his expression serious as he outlined the rules of engagement and safety protocols. Maya listened intently, taking mental notes on the terrain maps and mission objectives. Around her, the other recruits showed varying levels of nervousness and excitement. Sullivan stood at the front of the formation in his role as platoon leader, projecting confidence and authority. To an outside observer, he looked like exactly the kind of natural leader the military hoped to develop. Morrison himself seemed satisfied with the choice, having observed Sullivan's physical capabilities and apparent charisma throughout training. What Morrison couldn't see was the network of subtle tensions and loyalties that had developed within the platoon over the months of training. He didn't know about the quiet influence Maya had developed, or the way Sullivan's leadership style had alienated many of his own subordinates. As far as Morrison was concerned, this was simply an opportunity for Sullivan to prove himself as a leader while the rest of the platoon demonstrated their ability to follow orders and work as a team. The platoon was transported to the insertion point in military vehicles, bouncing along rough dirt roads that led deep into the training area. Maya sat quietly in the back of one of the trucks, checking and rechecking her equipment with a methodical precision that had become her trademark. Her rifle was clean and properly zeroed. Her pack was organized for maximum efficiency, and her uniform was squared away according to regulations. But beneath her calm exterior, Maya was preparing for something more than just a training exercise. She could sense the tension radiating from Sullivan, could see the way he kept glancing in her direction with barely concealed hostility. She knew that whatever he had planned for her, it would happen during this exercise when they were away from the direct supervision of the drill instructors. When they reached the insertion point, Sullivan gathered the platoon for his operational briefing. He had divided them into 3 squads, each responsible for locating one of the weapons caches. Maya found herself assigned to what was clearly the most difficult and dangerous objective, a cache located deep in enemy territory that would require extensive movement through hostile terrain. More troubling was the composition of her squad. Sullivan had carefully selected the members, choosing recruits who were either incompetent, disloyal to Maya, or both. Her squad leader was Mike Kowalski, one of Sullivan's remaining loyal followers who had never forgiven Maya for her challenge to their group's hierarchy. The other members were a mix of recruits who had struggled throughout training and a few who harbored resentments against Maya for various perceived slights. It was a setup, and Maya knew it. Sullivan was using the exercise as an opportunity to isolate her with people who either couldn't or wouldn't support her if things went wrong. The hope, she understood, was that her squad would fail spectacularly, preferably in a way that could be blamed on her leadership or performance. "Any questions about the mission?" Sullivan asked as he concluded his briefing. Maya raised her hand. "What are the contingency plans if squads encounter resistance beyond their capabilities?" Sullivan's smile was cold. "Each squad is expected to adapt and overcome using their training and initiative. That's the whole point of the exercise." It wasn't really an answer, and Maya understood that it wasn't meant to be. Sullivan was making it clear that her squad would be on their own, regardless of what they encountered. If they got into trouble, they couldn't count on support from the other squads. As the platoon prepared to move out, Maya conducted a quick assessment of her squad members. Kowalski was clearly going to be a problem. His loyalty to Sullivan was absolute, and he would likely sabotage the mission rather than allow Maya to succeed. 2 of the other recruits, Jimmy Barnes and Carlos Rivera, had struggled with basic soldiering skills throughout training and were unlikely to be effective in a high-stress situation. The only potentially reliable member of her squad was Sarah Kim, a quiet recruit from Oregon who had kept her head down throughout training. Kim wasn't particularly skilled, but she was steady and seemed to have no personal animosity toward Maya. If things went bad, Kim was the only person Maya felt she could count on. The movement to their objective began smoothly enough. Maya's squad broke off from the main group and headed northwest through dense forest toward their assigned target area. For the first several hours, they made good time through relatively easy terrain, following game trails and creek beds that provided natural concealment. Maya took point, navigating by compass and terrain association, while the others followed in a tactical formation they had practiced countless times during training. Despite the artificial nature of Sullivan's squad composition, the members were still trained soldiers who understood basic movement techniques and security procedures. The first sign of trouble came when they were about halfway to their objective. Maya called for a halt and signaled for the squad to take defensive positions while she consulted her map and GPS device. According to her calculations, they were making better time than expected and should reach the target area well before dark. That's when Kowalski decided to make his move. "Chun, I think we're going the wrong way," he announced loudly, abandoning any pretense of noise discipline. "According to my map, the objective is to the east." Maya looked at him in surprise. They had all received the same briefing, had all seen the same maps. There was no question about the direction to their objective. "The objective is northwest," she said quietly, pointing toward the direction they had been traveling. We're on the correct route. Kowalski shook his head stubbornly. I disagree. I think you're reading the map wrong. We should be heading east. Maya realized that this was the moment Sullivan had been planning. Kowalski was going to challenge her navigation and leadership, creating confusion and delay that would make it impossible for the squad to complete their mission successfully. If she gave in to his demands, they would miss their objective entirely. If she insisted on the correct route, Kowalski would likely continue to undermine her authority throughout the remainder of the exercise. Show me your map, Maya said calmly. Kowalski hesitated, clearly not having expected to be called on to provide evidence for his claims. I left it in my pack, but I'm sure about the direction. Maya studied his face for a moment, then made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Okay, she said. You think the objective is to the east? Then you take Barnes and Rivera and head east. Kim and I will continue northwest. Whoever reaches their objective first can signal the others. Kowalski looked confused. This wasn't how the confrontation was supposed to go. According to Sullivan's plan, Maya was supposed to either back down or get into an argument that would delay the entire squad. That's not. We're supposed to stay together as a squad, Kowalski protested. Maya shrugged. You said I was leading us in the wrong direction. This way we cover more ground and increase our chances of success. Unless you're not actually confident about your navigation. It was a masterful move. Kowalski was trapped between his desire to undermine Maya and his inability to admit that he had been lying about the direction to the objective. If he backed down now, he would look foolish in front of the other squad members. If he continued with his challenge, he would have to actually try to find an objective that he knew wasn't where he was claiming it was. Fine, he said finally, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Come on, Barnes, Rivera. We'll show Chin what real soldiers can do. As Kowalski led his two followers off in the wrong direction, Maya turned to Sarah Kim, who had been watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Think I made the right choice? Maya asked. Kim looked in the direction that Kowalski had gone, then back at Maya. He was definitely wrong about the direction. I saw the same briefing you did. But won't we get in trouble for splitting up the squad? Maya shouldered her pack and checked her compass. Maybe, but our mission is to locate and destroy the weapons cache. If Kowalski wants to go on a nature hike, that's his choice. We're going to complete the mission. The two women continued northwest, moving quickly and quietly through the forest. Without the dead weight of Kowalski's sabotage and the incompetence of Barnes and Rivera, they made excellent time. Maya's navigation was flawless, and her tactical awareness allowed them to avoid several patrols of opposing force soldiers who might have detected a larger, less skilled group. As they got closer to their objective, Maya began to demonstrate skills that went far beyond what a typical recruit should possess. She identified and avoided surveillance devices that would have been invisible to most soldiers. She chose routes that provided maximum concealment while minimizing travel time. Most impressively, she seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to sense when they were being observed or followed. How do you know all this stuff? Kim asked during a brief rest stop, watching Maya adjust their route to avoid what looked like empty forest, but which apparently contained hidden dangers. Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying the terrain ahead of them. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of old pain. Sometimes you learn things because you have to, she said simply. Sometimes survival teaches you skills that you never wanted to need. Before Kim could ask for clarification, Maya was moving again, leading them through a series of terrain features that would have challenged an experienced infantry squad. They crossed streams without leaving tracks, moved through thick underbrush without making noise, and navigated around obstacles with an efficiency that spoke of extensive training and experience. When they finally reached the area where their objective was located, Maya called for another halt while she conducted reconnaissance of the target area. The weapons cache was supposed to be hidden in a small clearing surrounded by dense woods, guarded by members of the opposing force who would be simulating enemy soldiers. Using binoculars and careful observation, Maya quickly identified the location of the cache and the positions of the guards. There were 4 opposing 4 soldiers, all armed with blank ammunition and wearing the distinctive armbands that identified them as enemy forces for the purposes of the exercise. Standard approach would be to call on the location and wait for reinforcement, Kim whispered as they observed the target from a concealed position. Maya nodded. That would be the textbook solution. But we don't have reinforcement available, and we don't know if the other squads will complete their missions. If we're going to destroy this cache, we'll have to do it ourselves. Kim looked at the enemy positions nervously. There are only 2 of us and 4 of them, and they're probably more experienced than we are. Maya smiled, and for the first time since Kim had known her, there was something almost predatory in the expression. Experience is relative, Maya said quietly. Trust me on this one. What happened next would become the stuff of legend among the training cadre at Fort Benning. Maya and Kim approached the weapons cache using infiltration techniques that were supposed to be taught to special operations soldiers, not basic training recruits. Maya moved through the forest like a ghost, covering ground quickly and silently while maintaining perfect situational awareness. She neutralized the first guard without the man even knowing she was there, using hand-to-hand combat techniques that left the opposing 4 soldier dead according to the rules of the exercise, but completely unharmed in reality. The other guards didn't even notice that their comrade had been eliminated. The second and third guard were taken out in similar fashion, with Maya demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that shocked even Kim, who was serving as her backup. By the time the 4th guard realized that something was wrong, it was too late. Maya had already secured the weapons cache and planted the simulated demolition charges that would destroy the target according to the exercise scenario. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes from start to finish. When it was over, the 4 opposing 4 soldiers were shaking their heads in amazement. Where the hell did you learn to move like that? One of them asked as Maya helped him to his feet. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I never even saw you coming. Maya just smiled and checked her watch. Training, she said simply. As Maya and Kim prepared to move to the extraction point, they heard the sound of gunfire in the distance. It was coming from the direction that Kowalski had gone with his 2 followers, and it sounded like a significant engagement rather than a brief skirmish. Maya paused, listening to the pattern of fire. Her expression grew concerned as she processed what she was hearing. That doesn't sound right, she said to Kim. That sounds like they're in serious trouble. Kim looked in the direction of the gunfire, then back at Maya. What do you want to do? Our mission is complete. We could head to the extraction point. Maya was already shouldering her pack and checking her weapon. No soldier left behind, she said firmly, even if they are idiots. They moved quickly toward the sound of combat, with Maya navigating through the forest with the same supernatural efficiency she had demonstrated throughout the exercise. As they got closer, the situation became clear. Kowalski and his 2 followers had stumbled into a much larger opposing force position and were pinned down by heavy fire. From their concealed observation position, Maya could see that Kowalski's group was trapped in a small depression with limited cover, taking fire from at least 8 enemy soldiers positioned on the high ground around them. It was exactly the kind of tactical disaster that happened when incompetent leaders made poor decisions in hostile territory. They're completely screwed, Kim whispered, watching the one-sided firefight. There's no way they can fight their way out of there. Maya studied the enemy positions carefully, her mind automatically calculating angles of fire, available cover, and possible approach routes. What she saw wasn't encouraging. The opposing force had established a textbook ambush position, with interlocking fields of fire and good cover. Under normal circumstances, extracting Kowalski's group would require a much larger force and extensive preparation. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Maya Chan was beginning to realize that she was not a normal soldier. Stay here and provide overwatch, she told Kim, handing her the binoculars. If things go bad, head to the extraction point and report what happened. Kim grabbed her arm as she started to move. "You can't go in there alone. That's suicide." Maya looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Sometimes you have to do things that seem impossible," she said quietly. "Sometimes there's no choice but to be stronger than you thought you could be." Then she was gone, moving through the forest toward an impossible rescue mission that would change everything. What Maya did over the next 20 minutes would be talked about in the training cadre for years to come. Using tactics that seemed to come from nowhere, she systematically dismantled the opposing force's ambush position. She moved like smoke through the trees, appearing and disappearing so quickly that the enemy soldiers couldn't get a fix on her position. One by one, she eliminated the opposing four soldiers using a combination of marksmanship, stealth, and hand-to-hand combat that demonstrated a level of skill far beyond anything that should have been possible for a basic training recruit. By the time she was finished, 8 experienced soldiers had been killed by a single opponent who had seemed to materialize out of thin air. When the engagement was over and Kowalski's group had been extracted from their impossible situation, the opposing force commander demanded to speak with Maya personally. "Soldier," he said, his voice filled with professional respect, "I need to know where you received your training. What you just did was special operations level work. That's not something you learn in basic training." Maya looked at the commander for a long moment, then glanced at Kowalski, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Sometimes life is the best teacher," she said. "Sometimes you learn because the alternative is death." The commander nodded slowly, recognizing something in her tone that spoke of experiences far beyond anything most soldiers would ever face. "Roger that, soldier. Outstanding work." As they prepared to move to the extraction point, Kowalski approached Maya hesitantly. His earlier arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something that might have been shame. "Chun," he said quietly, "I thank you. You didn't have to come back for us." Maya looked at him with those dark eyes, and Kowalski saw something there that made him take a step back. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was sadness and understanding and a kind of strength that he was only beginning to comprehend. "Yes, I did," she said simply. "That's what soldiers do. That's what being part of a team means, even when the team doesn't deserve it." The ride back to base was conducted in relative silence. Word of what had happened during the exercise had spread quickly through the training cadre, and Maya found herself the subject of intense scrutiny from drill instructors and opposing force personnel who wanted to understand how a basic training recruit had demonstrated such advanced capabilities. Staff Sergeant Morrison was waiting for her when she arrived back at the barracks. His expression was unreadable, but Maya could sense the questions that were building behind his professional demeanor. "Chun," he said simply, "report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. We need to have a conversation about your background and training." Maya nodded. "Yes, drill sergeant." As she walked toward the barracks to clean her equipment and prepare for the debrief, Maya could feel the eyes of her fellow recruits on her. The quiet girl who had arrived months earlier had been replaced by someone else entirely, someone who possessed skills and knowledge that couldn't be explained by anything in her official record. The truth was about to come out, whether she was ready for it or not. Maya sat in the hallway outside Staff Sergeant Morrison's office at exactly 0755, her uniform immaculate and her posture perfectly straight. She had spent most of the previous night staring at the ceiling, knowing that this moment had been inevitable since the day she arrived at basic training. The events of the field exercise had simply accelerated a timeline that was always going to lead to this conversation. At precisely 0800, Morrison's door opened, and he gestured for her to enter. His office was spartanly decorated with military awards and commendations on the walls, and a single photograph of what appeared to be his family on the desk. Morrison took his seat and indicated that Maya should sit in the chair across from him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other in silence. Morrison was a 20-year veteran who had seen every type of soldier imaginable, from the genuinely hopeless to the naturally gifted. But Maya Chun was something entirely different, a puzzle that didn't fit any of the categories in his experience. Chun, he began finally, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who was choosing his words carefully. Yesterday's performance raised some questions that I think need to be addressed. Maya nodded, but didn't speak, maintaining the respectful silence that had characterized her behavior throughout training. Morrison opened a file folder that Maya recognized as her personnel record. According to your paperwork, you have no military experience, no JROTC, no cadet programs, no family history of military service. Your background check shows a pretty typical college student from San Francisco. Good grades, no criminal history, no red flags of any kind. He paused, studying her face for any reaction. Maya's expression remained neutral and attentive. But what you demonstrated yesterday wasn't the performance of someone with no military training, Morrison continued. The tactical movement, the weapons handling, the combat techniques, that was advanced level work. The kind of skills that usually take years to develop. Maya remained silent, though something flickered in her dark eyes. Morrison leaned back in his chair. The opposing force commander who observed your actions has been in the Army for 15 years. He served multiple combat deployments and has trained with some of our most elite units. He told me that what you did yesterday was some of the most impressive individual soldier work he's ever seen. I was just trying to complete the mission, Drill Sergeant, Maya said quietly. Morrison studied her for a moment longer, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out another file folder. This one was thicker than her official personnel record and had the distinctive markings of a classified document. This is your expanded background investigation, he said, placing the folder on the desk between them. It took some digging, but I was able to get access to records that aren't normally part of a standard enlistment process. Maya's composed expression didn't change, but Morrison noticed that her hands, which had been resting relaxed in her lap, had tightened almost imperceptibly. 6 months during your junior year of college, you took a leave of absence for what your academic records list as personal reasons, Morrison said, opening the classified folder. But according to these records, that 6 months was actually spent in a psychiatric facility specializing in trauma recovery. Maya's breathing remained steady, but Morrison could see the tension building in her shoulders. The treatment was for severe PTSD resulting from what the reports describe as extended captivity and torture by hostile forces during humanitarian mission abroad. Morrison continued, his voice gentling slightly as he read from the file. For the first time since Maya had entered his office, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. A shadow of old pain crossed her face, quickly suppressed, but not quick enough to escape Morrison's notice. According to these records, Morrison said, closing the folder and looking directly at Maya, you were kidnapped while participating in a humanitarian aid mission in Southeast Asia. You were held by a militant group for 3 months. The details of what happened during that time are heavily redacted, but the medical reports indicate extensive physical and psychological trauma. Maya was very still, staring at a point on the wall behind Morrison's head. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't talk about that. Morrison nodded understanding. I can see why, but it explains a lot about your performance here. The skills you demonstrated yesterday, those were survival skills. The kind of things someone might learn if they were forced to adapt to extreme circumstances. Maya finally looked directly at him, and Morrison was struck by the depth of pain and strength he saw in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had been to hell and somehow found her way back. The mission I was on was supposed to be completely safe, Maya said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. We were delivering medical supplies to rural villages, working with local government officials who were supposed to provide security. I was just a college student trying to make a difference in the world. She paused, collecting herself before continuing. The militant group that took me had been watching the aid workers for weeks. They knew our routines, our security procedures, everything. When they attacked our convoy, they killed 3 people and captured 4 of us. I was the only one who... Maya stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Morrison waited patiently, recognizing that Maya was sharing something she had probably never spoken about in detail before. They held us in a camp in the mountains, Maya continued after a long moment. The conditions were terrible. They used us for propaganda purposes, made videos demanding ransom from our governments. But mostly they just wanted to break us down, to turn us into symbols of Western weakness. Maya's voice became stronger as she spoke, as if talking about the experience was helping her process emotions she had kept buried for years. The others gave up hope pretty quickly, she said. They couldn't adapt to the situation, couldn't find ways to resist or survive with dignity. But I couldn't accept that this was how my story was going to end. Morrison leaned forward, fascinated despite himself by the strength he heard in Maya's voice. So you learned, he said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded. I watched the guards, learned their routines and their weaknesses. I figured out how to move quietly, how to avoid being noticed. When they tried to break me down psychologically, I found ways to stay strong mentally. When they used physical intimidation, I learned how to protect myself. The combat skills? Morrison asked. Maya's smile was sad but proud. One of the guards was a former soldier who had been discharged for disciplinary problems. He was cruel, but he was also drunk most of the time and liked to brag about his military training. I listened to everything he said, watched everything he did. When he passed out drunk, I would practice the techniques he had described. Morrison shook his head in amazement. You taught yourself military tactics from an enemy guard. I taught myself whatever I needed to survive, Maya corrected. Tactics, weapons handling, stealth, psychological resistance techniques. I turned my captors into my unwitting instructors. How did you finally escape? Maya was quiet for a long time before answering. The rescue mission found the camp 3 months after we were captured. By then, I was the only one left alive. The others they couldn't survive what was done to them. Morrison saw Maya's hands tighten in a fist as she spoke, and he understood that she was leaving out details that were probably too painful to share. The rescue team was surprised to find me in the condition I was in, Maya continued. They expected to find someone broken and helpless. Instead, they found someone who had turned her captivity into a training program. The tattoo, Morrison said suddenly, remembering the glimpses he had caught during equipment inspections. Maya looked surprised that he had noticed. You saw it. Morrison nodded. Just a glimpse. Birds, I think. Maya reached up and touched her shoulder where beneath her uniform shirt the tattoo was hidden. It's a memorial, she said softly, for the other 8 workers who didn't make a home. The Chinese characters translate to in memory of those who gave their tomorrow for our today. Morrison felt a chill as he realized the significance of what Maya was telling him. You carry their memory with you. Every day, Maya confirmed. They died because they wanted to help people. They died because they believed in something bigger than themselves. The least I can do is honor their sacrifice by becoming someone worthy of the chance they never got. The office fell into silence as Morrison processed everything he had heard. Maya's story explained not just her unusual skills, but also her character, the quiet strength, the refusal to be broken down by harassment, the willingness to help others even when it cost her personally. Why didn't you tell us about this during processing? Morrison asked finally. This kind of experience, these skills, the Army needs people like you in specialized roles. Maya shook her head. I didn't want to be defined by what happened to me. I didn't want to be seen as damaged or traumatized. I wanted to prove that I could succeed as a regular soldier, not because of my past, but despite it. Morrison understood. Maya had wanted to earn her place through merit rather than sympathy or special consideration. What about the harassment from the other recruits? Morrison asked. You could have stopped it at any time just by telling people what you had been through. Maya's smile was sad, but resolute. Sullivan and the others were acting out their own pain and insecurity. Humiliating them publicly wouldn't have helped anyone. I hoped that if I could demonstrate a different way of being strong, quietly, without hurting others, maybe some of them would learn from that example. Morrison realized that he was looking at someone whose strength went far beyond physical capabilities or tactical skills. Maya Chan possessed a moral courage that was even rarer than the survival skills she had developed. The field exercise, Morrison said. When you went back to rescue Kowalski's group, you knew it was dangerous. You could have left them. No, Maya said firmly. I couldn't have. Those men, even Sullivan, they're not evil. They're just young and scared and trying to figure out who they want to be. If I had left them behind, I would have been saying that their lives didn't matter because they treated me badly. That's not who I am. Morrison sat back in his chair, feeling like he was seeing Maya clearly for the first time. This wasn't just a recruit with unusual skills. This was someone who embodied the best values that the military claimed to represent. What do you want to do with your career, Chun? He asked. With your background and demonstrated abilities, you could write your own ticket. Special operations, intelligence, officer candidate school. Any path you wanted to pursue would be available to you. Maya considered the question seriously. I want to serve, she said simply. I want to be part of something that protects people who can't protect themselves. I want to honor the memory of my friends who died by living a life that matters. Morrison nodded, then made a decision that would change both their futures. Chun, I'm going to recommend you for immediate advancement to a specialized training program, he said. Your skills and character are too valuable to waste in a standard assignment. But first, I think there's something you need to do. Maya looked at him questioningly. Your fellow recruits need to understand who you really are, Morrison said. Not so they'll treat you differently, but so they can learn from your example. The way you've conducted yourself during training, the quiet strength, the willingness to help others, the refusal to be broken by adversity. Those are lessons that could benefit everyone in your platoon. Maya hesitated. I don't want to be seen as a victim or a hero, drill sergeant. I just want to be a soldier. Morrison smiled. Chun, you already are a soldier. You've been a soldier since the day you decided to survive instead of giving up. Now it's time to help others understand what being a soldier really means. As Maya left Morrison's office, her mind was racing with the implications of their conversation. For months, she had worked to keep her past hidden, to blend in and avoid standing out. Now, she was being asked to step into the light and allow herself to be seen for who she really was. The prospect was terrifying in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. Maya had faced torture and death with courage, but the idea of emotional vulnerability still frightened her. Sharing her story would mean opening herself up to judgment, pity, or worse, exploitation by people who might want to use her experiences for their own purposes. But as she walked back toward the barracks where her fellow recruits were preparing for their graduation ceremony, Maya realized that Morrison was right. Her story wasn't just about her. It was about the power of the human spirit to endure and overcome. It was about the choice to become stronger rather than bitter, to help others rather than seek revenge. Most importantly, it was about proving that true strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the courage to remain kind and compassionate even in the face of cruelty. That evening, as the platoon gathered for their final formation before graduation, Maya made a decision that would impact every person in the room. She asked Morrison for permission to address her fellow recruits, to share the story she had kept hidden for so long. Morrison agreed, recognizing that this moment represented the culmination of everything Maya had learned during her time at basic training. Not just the military skills, but the deeper lessons about leadership, courage, and the true meaning of service. As Maya stood before her platoon, looking out at the faces of the people who had been her tormentors, her allies, and her students, she felt a sense of completion. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived months earlier, trying to hide from her past. She was someone who had learned to carry her scars with dignity and use her strength to lift others up. The moment had come to reveal the truth that had been hidden beneath her quiet exterior all along. The moment had come to show everyone, including Sullivan, what real strength looked like. What Maya said during that formation would be remembered by every person present for the rest of their lives. But more than that, it would transform how they understood courage, resilience, and what it truly meant to be a warrior. The quiet girl was about to show them that sometimes the strongest people are those who speak the softest, and that true power comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the choice to heal and protect instead. The evening formation took place on the parade ground where Maya and her fellow recruits had first assembled months earlier. The Georgia sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and a warm breeze carried the scent of pine trees from the surrounding forests. Tomorrow would bring their graduation ceremony, but tonight was reserved for final reflections and farewells. Staff Sergeant Morrison stood before the assembled platoon, his normally stern expression softer than usual. Around him, 42 recruits stood at attention, their uniforms crisp and their bearing reflecting the months of training they had endured together. They looked like soldiers now, Maya thought as she surveyed the formation. The scared, uncertain young people who had arrived on that bus so long ago had been transformed into something stronger and more purposeful. "Before we dismiss for evening chow," Morrison announced, his voice carrying easily across the formation, "Recruit Chun has requested permission to address the platoon. Given her outstanding performance during training and particularly during yesterday's field exercise, I've granted that permission." A murmur rippled through the formation. Maya had never spoken publicly before, had never sought attention or recognition for her achievements. Most of the recruits looked curious about what she might want to say. Sullivan, standing near the front of the formation, looked wary and slightly hostile. Maya stepped forward, taking the position at the front of the formation that Morrison vacated for her. For a moment, she simply looked out at the faces of her fellow recruits, many of whom she had helped in small ways throughout their training. These people had been her world for the past several months, and tomorrow they would all scatter to different assignments and likely never see each other again. When Maya spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the same measured cadence that had characterized all her interactions during training. 3 months ago, when I arrived here, most of you probably wondered what I was doing in the military, she began. I'm small, I'm quiet, and I don't fit the typical image of what a soldier looks like. Some of you questioned whether I belonged here at all. Maya's gaze moved across the formation, making brief eye contact with several recruits. When her eyes met Sullivan's, she held his gaze for a moment longer than the others. I understood your doubts, she continued. In many ways, I shared them. I came here carrying experiences that I had never talked about, skills that I had never wanted to learn, and fears that I was trying to overcome. I thought that if I could just blend in, just get through training without drawing attention to myself, I could prove that I belonged here despite my past. Maya paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Around her, the formation had grown completely silent. Even the usual background noise of the base seemed muted, as if the entire world was listening to what she had to say. But I've learned something,